Hey guys, what's up? It's Fran here. You probably know me from the channel Simply Fran, and welcome back to the StudyTube project. On my days, it feels so weird to say that. But yeah, today I thought I'd delve into the topic of institutional racism within our healthcare system, within the NHS itself. And yes, this is like the biggest topic to try and get through over the next few minutes. However, with the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement, I thought it was important to kind of continue that conversation through this video and videos alike in order to avoid it becoming a social media trend. Because the reality is, for people living through these experiences of racism and discrimination, it is a reality that people have to face every single day. Now, some of you out there may be thinking, Fran, why did you pick this topic? And for those of you who don't know, I have just finished my first year medicine at Oxford. So essentially, I'm going to be a future practitioner. I'm going to be a future doctor, black doctor working within the NHS. So issues of racism, both on a patient level and also on a medical professional level, was important for me to find out more about. So first of all, let's talk about racism. Racism is not just a personal thing, it's embedded within the society that we live in and the structures, and this is called institutional racism. And institutional racism is a pattern, again, reading from this, a pattern of social institutions giving negative treatment to a group of people based on their race, and hence reducing their accessibility to housing, neighbourhoods, education, employment, and other desirable resources. And yes, it's important that we have these definitions, but I thought I'd illustrate them and provide context by giving a few examples. So a study was done to kind of investigate job prospects across different ethnic groups, and they found that applicants with white sounding names were 74% more likely to get a job than applicants with ethnic sounding names, although they had the exact qualifications or the exact CVs. Other examples of this are present in studies showing that university professors are more likely to respond to students with white sounding names as opposed to ethnic sounding names. Coming from a student perspective, I know how important it is to have that communication with your professors or your tutors, so I know that this could have a detrimental impact on students. And more relevantly to the conversation that we're having, an article released by the BMJ showed that doctors with English sounding names were more likely to progress onto senior roles within the NHS than doctors with ethnic sounding names, although they had the same level of experience and training. This goes to show that institutional racism is a reality and does plague our NHS. Now, why do I think this is an important conversation to be had? Racism is often one of those things that people shy away from. You don't typically discuss it at the dinner table, and often it makes people feel uncomfortable because no one wants to admit or believe that they're capable of being racist or kind of housing implicit biases which lead to prejudice. Our healthcare system, the NHS, is known as one of the biggest successes of the UK. However, we cannot ignore the deeply entrenched racism that exists within the NHS and how it affects patients and workers. Ultimately, I hope that this video will help us to understand the magnitude of the problem at hand. So now let's quickly go over what are implicit biases. Fran, you've said it a couple of times, however, I don't exactly know what they are. Don't worry, I've got you, I've got your back. Let's start with the definition. So, essentially, these are ingrained algorithms in our mind. They're kind of a complex set of emotions that kind of cling to an individual and manifest themselves in the way that we perceive individuals from different groups, the way that we naturally stereotype people, the way that we naturally group or cluster people. Neuroscientists have done a lot of research into this field. The evidence isn't conclusive, but they believe that unconscious biases are kind of like an evolutionary adaptation. In order for it to make it easier for us to navigate the world around us, we're constantly surrounded and taking in so many stimuli, so much new information, and that can be overwhelming. So essentially, us having these implicit biases, us categorizing people up and having these stereotypes makes it easier to process and more efficient. However, this does come at the massive cost and disadvantage that often these implicit biases have the potential to kind of cause these natural prejudices in each one of us. Now, examples of this within healthcare itself is that people of Black, African or Caribbean descent are more tolerable to pain, that they can take more pain compared to white patients of the same age, of the same illness. And this is just not true. I don't know where this misconception came about that the fact that we have more melanin, more pigment in our skin makes it thicker. It's scientifically incorrect and just plain stupid and just an excuse for racist actions. Sorry guys, I've turned the lights on so there's a change in lighting. But yeah, the problem with these implicit biases is that they shape the way that we perceive patients, the way we treat them and assess them. And ultimately, this can lead to differences and inequalities in the way that we actually take care of patients, which may lead to the disparities that we see in health across different ethnic groups. For example, with the implicit bias of doctors and med students that Black patients are able to tolerate more pain, this leads to them as practitioners then prescribing less pain medication to these patients, and this feeds into the greater mortality that we see amongst Black pregnant women and during Black childbirth, essentially. And it's clear to see that these assumptions, these implicit biases, can be life-threatening and dangerous to patients. So it's so important as doctors, as future practitioners, as general members of society, that we make a conscious effort to unlearn these stereotypes that have been so deeply ingrained into us during our upbringing as a result of seeing certain stereotypes being portrayed on the media. Many people in general don't really support the fact that a huge amount of emphasis is placed on implicit or unconscious biases, because it suggests that all these racist or prejudice kind of thoughts and actions are out of our control. It's, you know, it's ingrained in our DNA almost, and we can't control being racist. This is just not the case. We're smart organisms. We have higher, like as humans, we're incredibly smart. We have the capacity to kind of counteract these implicit biases, counteract these stereotypes that have been fed into us by our parents, by society. We all have the ability to control them. So first of all, let's look at the Black patient's experience. The treatment of Black patients by medical doctors is very different to the treatment of white patients, for example. There have been studies that show that doctors spend less time with Black patients, that they involve them less in decision making, which kind of takes away the autonomy and control that a patient has over their healthcare, which is an important thing for patients. And ultimately, a lot of ethnic minority patients have said that this treatment makes them feel less welcomed. They tend to avoid healthcare or insurance in the US unless it's necessary, because they don't see kind of going into the NHS or healthcare institutions and being treated poorly as good enough trade-off for having their healthcare problems solved, which is really sad to think. This institution was designed to be a healthcare safe haven almost. In addition to the needs of ethnic minority patients being marginalised and essentially not being cared about as much as other patients, institutional racism also means that the NHS fails to tackle with healthcare problems that are predominantly affecting people from ethnic minority groups. For example, some statistics: 95% of doctors who died within the first month of lockdown due to COVID-19 were Black or brown. Here we can see that there's a clear inequality in healthcare standards across ethnic groups, and kind of the media is so quick to revert to oversimplified explanations. One explanation that you may have heard of for this massive disproportion in COVID-19 cases is that people of the BAME community were lacking in vitamin D, etc. However, there's no scientific evidence for this. Other facts: Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. As I was saying before, this is often the result of implicit biases which convince practitioners that Black women are stronger, that their skin's thicker and they're able to tolerate more pain, and it's just not the case. Often the media will try to suggest that Black women are unhealthier compared to women of other ethnic groups, but this simply isn't the case. Another main kind of driver which leads to Black people being more prone to dying during childbirth and other diseases is this concept of biological weathering. This toxic stress is a result of a day-to-day life of constantly being exposed to racism, to discrimination, to being treated differently. It could be that you're just made to feel different at work or less intelligent in school because of your race. Or it could be that you're discriminated against in the housing industry or by police or by colleagues in the workforce. This stress has been proven to have a detrimental impact on your health and can result in this concept called biological weathering. When I first read about weathering, it reminded me of geography, for the concept of kind of rocks constantly being exposed to natural elements, whether that be the wind or the sea, and constantly being eroded, constantly being broken down, and as a result this leads to the breakdown of the rock. And this concept applies to human beings. There's only so much stress that we can take before it has its impact on our innate biochemistry, the way our body works. In addition to stress worsening mental health, it has been proven that it also has physiological effects on our bodies, and this is due to something called the fight or flight response. So evolutionarily, this fight or flight response was one of our body's mechanisms to prepare us just in case we were in the presence of threats such as prey or groups of human beings who wanted to attack us back in the day where we were hunters and gatherers. However, there are still remnants and the remains of this mechanism still today. And naturally, the body perceives stress as one of those threats. As a result of this biological weathering, it can actually lead to premature biological aging. So a patient may be 25 because, you know, they were born 25 years ago, but due to the immense amount of stress and discrimination and racism that they've been exposed to in their life, all of that have meant that their body has the same kind of function and age of a 34-year-old. As a result, this disproportionately increases the chances of having chronic conditions such as hypertension, so high blood pressure, heart conditions, strokes, and diabetes. And this can manifest itself during childbirth, and this can give rise to the results that we see. Black women are 5 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women, who often have more pre-existing conditions. So we've looked at the perspective and experiences of Black and ethnic minority patients. However, it's also important that we switch the perspective and also look at the experiences of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, etc. Now I'm reading from my laptop, and the latest Workforce Race Equality Standard report, so the WRES report from NHS England, have showed that BAME staff are victim to increasing levels of bullying, harassment and abuse on the basis of racism. Now, the form of this racism can take the form of verbal abuse from patients, not receiving honest feedback from consultants or senior members of staff, which is important for your progression, and exclusion. Oftentimes, this can take the form of microaggressions, which are more subtle acts of discrimination, and the fact that they're more subtle makes them harder to call out or to report, leaving members of marginalised communities feeling more othered or alienated. This is a sort of stress that can have a detrimental impact on Black workers within the NHS. It can increase the risk to hypertension, to chronic diseases such as strokes, cardiovascular diseases, and further exacerbate the health inequalities that we see across different ethnic groups. Also, there are inequalities in terms of disciplinary actions. Black staff members are 2 times as likely to be referred to the GMC, which is the General Medical Council and is like the governing body of the NHS. And this can have such a huge impact on a doctor's journey within the NHS. Ultimately, working conditions for Black and ethnic minority workers is not that great, and this needs to change, because not only are these the people that are treating us, who are sacrificing so much of their time to do such good to society, but the NHS as it is in this state is at a massive shortage in terms of the workforce. And this is even more significant because the NHS is the biggest employer of Black and ethnic minority workers and staff members. Now, alongside this, let's also look at NHS leadership and executive boards. So let's look at the people on top making these decisions and whether they're representative of, number 1, the workforce, and number 2, society as a whole. So 92% of the chairs and non-execs of the NHS trust are white. So it's clear to see that the top is not representative. But this doesn't make sense, because inclusion and diversity, there have been proven benefits to having this within your management team. Not only do you have the variety of different perspectives, you'll have a greater range of people who will often have a greater range of skills. Studies at Harvard University have shown that more diverse groups are able to problem solve faster, they have greater innovation, which is key in medical practice because you need those skills in order to quickly and effectively reach diagnoses. Now, the question I had when I was reading all of this is, if the executive and senior boards were more diverse, would we see the great disparities in healthcare, the great inequalities in healthcare that we do across different ethnic groups? Would 95% of doctors who died from COVID-19 within the first month be Black or brown? That's the question that I ask. Now, finally, let's talk about the pay gap within healthcare. For every £1 a Black female doctor earns, a white female doctor earns £1.19 and a white male doctor earns £1.38. This truly illustrates that the effects of intersectionality between race but also gender cannot be ignored. The fact that a healthcare worker is both female and Black is almost like a double blow. This is quite devastating here, because as healthcare professionals, as doctors, they've often been in medical school for 5 or 6 years. They've invested a lot of their finances and their time into becoming a doctor. In this country, doctors work hard and long hours. They're overworked and they're already underpaid. And just to add the effects of discrimination is that much more upsetting. As a future doctor, I hope to be paid the amount that I deserve for all like the time and energy that I've invested into my career. And it's really kind of scary to look at these statistics and realize that this could potentially be my future. We have now reached the end of my video, and I hope that this has been both eye-opening and educational. This video essentially aims to bring to light the issues that reside within our healthcare system, and also is a call to the NHS to put greater focus on their management in order to tackle such racial inequalities for both patients and staff. Adequate healthcare and just humane treatment in general should be a right that all patients have and shouldn't be up for discussion. It's absolutely amazing that more conversations are being had around the topic of race. However, the most important thing is that these conversations lead to action. So I really hope my video has inspired you guys to go out there to research this stuff for yourself, to introspect ourselves, look inwards, and to question our own implicit biases, because everyone has implicit biases, including myself. If you found this interesting, make sure to subscribe to my channel. All the information will be in the description bar below. I discuss all things medical school with a side dish of just everyday life vlogs. And I've actually recently started a series called Let's Talk, where I discuss issues such as this one, which affect minority and marginalized groups. Now that's all from me. Wishing you guys the best day possible, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.